My name is Tom Bennett. I taught American history for 23 years in a small high school just outside Helena, Montana. I've never been loud, never been the type to stir a room. I believed in quiet things, consistency, showing up, and doing what's right even if no one claps for it. And for most of my life, that was enough. My son, Lucas, was born on a rainy Thursday in May. I remember because I missed the school board meeting that night, and I'd never missed one before. But when they handed me that tiny swaddled boy and said, "Here's your son," I knew something in me had shifted. For the first few years, co-parenting with my ex-wife, Dana, was manageable. Complicated, sure, but we tried. We shared weeks, traded holidays, and kept the peace for Lucas' sake. At least, that's what I thought we were doing. The trouble didn't arrive in a single moment. It crept in quietly, like the way you notice autumn in Montana. One leaf turns, then another, until one morning you realize the whole tree is bare. Lucas stopped calling back as quickly. He stopped asking to come over on my off weekends. "Mom says you're always busy," he'd say sometimes, or "I forgot I had other plans." I chalked it up to adolescence. Friends, homework, growing pains. I didn't press him. But then, holidays came and went. Christmas mornings without him. Birthday, cards unopened. Weeks turned into months. I remember standing in my classroom during lunch one Thursday watching the snow pile up outside the window when I finally let myself admit it. My son was being pulled away from me. Not by force, not through any official ruling, but by something quieter and far more lasting. It wasn't that Dana had lied outright. It was more subtle than that. A carefully dropped comment here. "Your father never keeps his promises." A sidering drop-off. "I hope this weekend goes better than last time." Enough small shadows can make a child believe the sun never shined. I didn't fight it in court. I thought about it, of course I did. But every lawyer I consulted warned me. Accusations without documentation are fog in a courtroom. The burden of proof would be on me, and all I had were missed calls and a gut feeling that something precious was slipping through my fingers. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I waited, and I wrote. The first letter came on Lucas' 14th birthday. I wrote it in one sitting pen on paper, like my father used to write me during his deployment years. It wasn't a lecture. It wasn't even a defense. It was just a note from a dad who missed his boy. I kept it simple, told her what I'd been up to, shared a story about the time we got lost in Glacier National Park because he insisted, "Dad, I know the trail." I ended it with a line I'd use every time after. "I love you. I always will. You don't have to write back. Just know this letter exists." I placed it in an envelope, wrote Lucas on the front, and put it in a wooden box in my hall closet. One letter, then another, and another. Every month. 12 months a year. 5 years. Always dated. Always honest. Never bitter. Because deep down, I believed that someday if the world was kind, or if time softened, the truth me son might knock on my door again. And if he did, I wanted him to know I'd never stop talking, even when he stopped listening. There's a kind of ache that doesn't scream, it just settles in. Quiet. Heavy. Like the chill that seeps into your bones during a long Montana winter. You don't notice it at first. Then one morning, you wake up and realize it's been there all along. That's how it felt losing Lucas. Not in a courtroom, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in the slow erosion of contact, trust, and shared routines. No judge signed away my parenting rights. No police officer knocked on my door. But one day, I realized I hadn't heard my son's voice in almost a year. And no one had to say it aloud. I wasn't the dad anymore. I was just a name on old school form. I remember the first Thanksgiving without him. I made 2 plates out of habit. Roasted the turkey, set out the cranberry sauce the way he liked it, with extra oranges mixed in. I even put out his seat, just in case. It stayed empty. The silence was worse than any argument we could have had, because at least arguments mean someone still cares enough to talk. I didn't blame Dana, not fully. People parent through pain. She and I had plenty of history, most of it unresolved. And hurt, when left unchecked, always look for somewhere to land. Sometimes it lands in a child's heart. The thing is, I could have fought. I could have dragged it all into a courtroom, demanded evaluations, exposed her manipulation. But what would that have done to Lucas? I'd seen enough children caught between two angry parents. No matter who wins, they lose. So instead, I let go. Not because I wanted to, not because it didn't hurt like hell, but because sometimes letting go is the only way to keep love intact. There's no parade for restraint, no trophy for choosing peace. People don't stop you in the street and say, "Thanks for not making things worse." But that's what I tried to doorfuse to become the bitter man in the story someone else was writing about me. I kept teaching, kept showing up to work every morning at 7:15, said good morning to the janitor, helped my students understand why the Civil War didn't really end in 1865 and why Lincoln's silence at times said more than his words ever could. But when the school day ended, I'd go home to a house that held one less laugh, one less pair of shoes by the door, one less reason to keep the porch light on. And still I wrote. One letter every month. Some were long, others just a few lines. I'd write about the weather, about the students who reminded me of him, about how I saw a kid at the grocery store who looked like he did at Timop, brown hair, too big sweatshirt, asking questions about everything. I never accused, never defended. I just shared, because I wanted my son to know who I was, not who someone told him I'd become. There's a kind of discipline to writing when you're not sure anyone will ever read your words. It's like planting seeds in frozen soil. But you do it anyway because if spring ever comes, you'll want something to bloom. Sometimes the letters helped. Other times they hurt more. I catch myself staring at the envelope, wondering if it was enough. Wondering if love without presence was really love at all. But then I'd remember that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice. A series of small decisions one after another keeps showing up even when no one's looking. And that's what the letters were. Me, showing up. Every month. For 5 years. No missed months. No skipped birthdays. No giving in to despair. People around me asked why I didn't move on. Why I didn't try harder to get over it. They meant well, I suppose. But you don't move on from your child. You don't get over love. You just hold it differently. I kept the box of letters in the top drawer of an old dresser. Sometimes I take them out and reread them. Not to relive the past, but to remind myself of who I was still trying to be, a father, even in absence. Eventually, the pain softened. Not gone, but quieter. Less sharp. It became part of the background noise of life, like an old injury that only aches when it rains. I stopped expecting anything, but I never stopped writing, because I believed, even if just in the quiet corners of my soul, that one day when Lucas was old enough, hurt enough, or curious enough to want to know the truth. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to explain it. I'd just hand him a box and let the letters speak for me. It's a strange thing, writing to someone who doesn't write back. At first, I thought I'd stop after a few months, that the silence would swallow my efforts, and I'd lose the will to continue. But somewhere between the third and the fourth letter, I stopped writing for a reply. I started writing for something else. Hope. I'd write one every month, always by hand, always on the same stationery. Ivory paper with navy blue trim. Dana used to tease me for being old-fashioned about letters. But there's something about ink on paper that feels more permanent than pixels ever could. Each letter began the same way. Hi, Lucas, it's Dad. No drama, no pleading, just a quiet voice trying to stay alive in the background of a boy's life. The first few letters were heavy with memory. I told him about the time we built a snow fort that held up through 2 whole storms. Or when we burned pancakes on that camping trip because we forgot the oil. The time he caught a fish, screamed with joy, then threw it back because he looked surprised and I felt bad. He was only 6 then, but I remembered it like it happened yesterday. Over time, I shifted. I stopped writing just about the past and started writing about the present. What I was reading, what I was learning. I told him how my knees were starting to complain more during morning walks, how the school finally upgraded to smartboards, and how I never quite figured out how to use them right. I'd end each letter the same way. I love you. I always will. You don't have to write back. Just know this letter exists. It was my way of giving him permission to be angry, to stay away, or to come back if he ever wanted to in his own terms. And every time I folded another letter and tucked it into the wooden box in my closet, I felt a quiet kind of peace. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded me that I hadn't become bitter, that I still had room in my heart for him even if he never knew it. There were months when I had very little to say. Februaries are like that in Montana. Cold, gray, uneventful. Still, I wrote. And there were months when the words came fast and full. Like the time I ran into his old science teacher at the grocery store. She still remembered his 5th grade volcano project. Said she kept a picture of it on her bulletin board. I wrote that down too, because even if I couldn't tell him those things in person, I wanted him to know he'd mattered everywhere. Sometimes I'd include a newspaper clipping, a recipe, a joke he would have rolled his eyes at when he was 12. Other times, I'd just write one page. I don't know what to say today, but I still miss you. That was enough. The act of writing itself became a form of prayer and act of faith. I didn't know if Lucas would ever see these letters, but I believed in them, believed they carried something of me he might someday need. A few years in, I made a backup copy of each one, scanned them, encrypted the file, and stored it on a secure drive. Not because I didn't trust myself to keep the box safe, but because I'd spent too long building something real to risk losing it to fire or flood. Love, after all, deserves its own kind of insurance. And the box itself had changed, too. What started as a plain oak container became something sacred. I lined it with felt, polished it once a year, not because I'm sentimental, but because it held something irreplaceable. My father's watch didn't live in that box. My military ribbons didn't either. Only the letters. The quiet parts of me Lucas had never stopped carrying, even when he stopped seeing me. Over time, the writing became easier. My grief softened into gratitude for the years I'd had with him, for the man I was still trying to be, even in the waiting. And yes, there were days when I almost stopped. Days when the silence felt heavier than the paper in my hand. But then I'd remember something my own father told me once, not long before he died. Love is rarely loud, but it's always faithful. So I wrote, month after month, without reply. Because some things are worth saying even if you're the only one listening. It's funny how silence can become a presence all its own. Most people think of silence as absence sound, of conversation, of life. But over time, I learned it could take on weight, shape, texture. It could fill a room like smoke. And I lived with it for years. Lucas didn't write back. Not after the first letter. Not after the 10th. Not after the 60th. The only clues I had to his life came from public breadcrumbs of social media posts someone else showed me, or a quiet mention from a family friend who said they saw him at a coffee shop near campus. He was growing up, becoming a man, and I was still writing letters no one read. I'd be lying if I said that didn't break me some days. I'd sit down at my desk, pen in hand, and feel like I was trying to reach someone through a wall I couldn't see, let alone break. But each time I considered giving up, I'd ask myself a question I couldn't shake. If he ever opens the box, what story will it tell? And the answer was always the same. It would tell him that I never stopped believing in him, that I never tried to win him back with anger or guilt or public battles, that I trusted love quiet, consistent, unshakable libido do the heavy lifting. So I kept writing. There's a strength in restraint. It's not flashy. It doesn't draw applause. But it runs deep. I didn't post about my heartbreak online. Didn't blast Dana on message boards. Didn't sit around friends fishing for sympathy. I just kept going. Woke up, made my coffee, graded assignments, took the dog for a walk, wrote my letter. Routines like those become a kind of rhythm. And rhythm gives you dignity, especially when life refuses to give you clarity. Over time, I started to notice what the silence taught me. It taught me that love isn't something we earn. It's something we offer. It taught me that being a father wasn't about shared custody calendars or being listed on emergency contact forms. It was about being a safe place even when the world told my son I wasn't. It taught me that bitterness is always an option, but so is grace. There were years when I didn't hear Lucas' name spoken aloud, not even by family. People tiptoe around pain, even when it's sitting right there at the dinner table. Especially when it wears your face. But in the quiet, I found peace. I started spending more time in the workshop behind my house. Built a few benches. Crafted a coffee table for my neighbor who just lost her husband. I didn't charge. Just wanted to make something with my hands that would last. Funny thing about working with wood, if you rush it, it splinters. If you force the grain, it splits. But if you take your time, follow the curve, trust the natural lines, it holds together. That felt familiar, because that's what I was doing with my life. Following the curve, trusting the long game, letting time do what court orders and phone calls couldn't. One winter, during a particularly brutal cold snap, I came down with pneumonia. Spent 2 weeks off work, alone in the house, weak and aching. And still I wrote a letter. It wasn't long. My handwriting shook, but I signed it the same way I always did. I love you. I always will. You don't have to write back. Just know this letter exists. I think that's when I realized this wasn't about waiting for a response anymore. It was about staying true to who I was even when no one was watching. Even when the only voice in the room was mine. Even when silence was the only answer. Because sometimes the way we choose to carry our pain says more than how we fight it. And I chose to carry mine with open hands, not clenched fists. I didn't know if Lucas would ever come back. But if he did, I wanted him to find a father he could be proud of, not a man twisted by the absence of a son. It was a Sunday in late March, just before the snowmelt gives way to muddy trails and the first signs of green on the ridge. I was in the kitchen, chopping onions for stew, when I heard the knock. Not the mailman's tap or the neighbor's double rap. This one was slower, hesitant. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the door. And there he was, Lucas, my son, standing on the porch, taller than I remembered, broader too, wearing a flannel shirt like the ones I used to keep for weekends and a backpack slung low on one shoulder. He looked like a man, but his eyes, those were still the eyes of a boy I once carried on my shoulders, laughing through the rain. We didn't speak at first, just stood there in the doorway, years of distance hanging between us like fog. Finally, he said, "Hey, Dad." I opened the door wider. "Eh? So?" He stepped inside. I didn't ask why. Didn't press. Just motioned toward the kitchen. "Stew's almost done. You hungry?" He nodded. Quietly. We sat across from each other at the old oak table I'd refinished the year after Dana and I divorced. He didn't touch the stew at first. Just looked around. Took in the familiar walls, the bookshelf with his childhood drawings still tucked in the corners, the photos that never came down even when he stopped visiting. After a few minutes, he said, "I didn't know if you'd still be here." I smiled, not bitter. Didn't know if you'd ever knock. He looked down, picked at the rim of the bowl. "I didn't come to explain," he said. "I don't think I cannot all of it." "You don't have to." There was silence again, but this time it felt different. Not empty. Just careful. Like we were both walking across a frozen lake, testing the ice. Then he asked, "Why didn't you ever reach out?" I exhaled. Slowly. "I did," I said. "Once a month. For 5 years." He blinked. Confused. I rose, went to the hallway, opened the bottom drawer of the dresser, and pulled out the wooden box. I set it gently on the table between us. "This," I said, "is every letter I ever wrote to you." Lucas stared at it like it might vanish if he reached for it too fast. I didn't push it toward him. Just left it there. He looked at me, eyes a little wet now. "Why?" "Because I knew one day you'd wonder who I really was. And I wanted you to hear it from minute someone else's version." He nodded once. Still didn't open the box. Instead, he said, "Mom." Said things. I nodded too. "I know. She made it sound like you just stopped trying." "I never stopped," I said quietly. "But I stopped forcing it. You deserved space. And I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose sides." He swallowed hard. I think I did anyway. I didn't respond. There's no good answer to guilt a grown child carries. Only presence. He reached for the box then. Pulled it close. His fingers brushed the smooth lid like he was touching something sacred. "I don't know if I'm ready to read them," he said. "You don't have to be," I told him. "They're yours now. Whenever you are." We didn't talk much more that day. He finished his stew, asked to walk around the backyard. I let him. Gave him the same space I'd given in silence this time, with company. Before he left, he paused at the door. "I'm sorry," he said. I stepped closer, placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm just glad you're here." He gave a soft smile. Not wide, but real. I think I'll come back next weekend, he said. And I nodded. You're always welcome. When he left, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just stood in the doorway, looking out at the thawing yard, the faint buds on the apple tree, and thought. Sometimes the longest journeys end not with fireworks, but with a knock on the door. And when they do, you don't ask why it took so long. You just open it. Lucas didn't read the letters all at once. He came by again the next weekend, just like he said he would. Knocked once, then let himself in with the same creak of the screen door I'd never gotten around to fixing. He carried the box under one arm like it was something delicate, like he wasn't sure what it would do to him. I asked if he wanted coffee. He nodded. We sat in silence while the percolator did its slow, steady work on the stove. The kind of rhythm you don't interrupt with words that aren't ready. He didn't open the box that day. Just kept it on the table while we talked small things, safer ground. College. Work. How his car wouldn't start last Thursday because of the cold snap. I didn't bring up the letters. I didn't need to. They were there between us. Waiting. A week later, he returned with a different look in his eyes. Quieter. Not sad exactly. Just softer. I read the first 6, he said. I didn't ask what he thought. Just poured us both coffee and sat down across from him like it was any other Sunday. He kept going. There was one August 17th. You wrote about our camping trip, the one where I dropped the lantern in the river. I chuckled. That water was ice cold. You said you laughed so hard you forgot to be mad. I remember. He looked down at the rim of his mug. I forgot that too, until I read it. That's when I understood. The letters weren't just stories. They were maps off who we were, who we'd been, and who I still hoped we could be. And slowly, he was finding his way back. Over the next few months, Lucas came by often, sometimes with a few questions, sometimes with quiet tears he didn't try to explain. Other times, he just sat by the fire and read for an hour without saying a word. I gave him the space. Let the pages speak where my voice would have only crowded the moment. One Sunday afternoon, he held up a letter and said, You mentioned you were sick one winter. Pneumonia? I nodded. Thought it was just the flu. Turned out worse. I got through it. He looked at me then with something like regret. No, not regret. A kind of ache only time can make. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to. Still, he didn't finish the sentence. But he didn't need to. I could see Ith's understanding of what it meant to be a parent shifting, maturing, deepening. He kept the box now, took it back to his place, said he wanted to read the rest in private. I want to give each one its own day, he told me. They feel like they deserve that. I smiled. They were written that way. He read them all over the course of a year. And as he read, something changed between using it with loud declarations or tearful apologies, but in smaller ways. He started calling me Dad again. Started asking what I thought about things, work, relationships, the books he was reading. One night, he even brought over a girl he'd been seeing for a few months. Nervous, hands in his pockets. Her name's Callie, he said. Thought maybe you could meet her. We grilled steaks on the back porch, the wind carrying the smell of hickory and new beginnings. Later that night, as we washed the dishes, Lucas leaned against the counter. I used to think you didn't care, he said, because you didn't fight for me. I stayed quiet. Let him finish. But I was wrong. You did fight. You just did it in a way I couldn't see yet. I met his eyes. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to last. He nodded slowly. You did. He paused, then added, I don't think I could have handled those letters when I was younger. I think they would have broken me. They weren't meant to break you. I said. They were meant to be waiting when you were ready. That's the thing about love offered without demand it waits. Not passively, not with resentment, but with faith. Faith that time, and truth, and patience can still do what anger never could. Lucas still keeps the box. Says he opens on hard days, just to remind himself of what held. And me? I started writing again. Not letters this time, just notes. Journals about the days I have now. The conversations we share. The fire pit nights and porch coffees. The way my son laughs again, like he used to when he was 10. Only now, the laughter is deeper. Earned. Real. I don't know what tomorrow holds. But I do know this. Every letter I ever wrote mattered. Because they weren't just a way to hold on. They were a way to be found. The following spring, Lucas asked me to join him for lunch at a small cafe near the university. It was a Tuesday, cloudy, with the kind of chill breeze that keeps the coat zipped even in April. He was already there when I arrived. Sat near the window, 2 coffees already on the table, both black. I smiled. He remembered. "Thanks," I said, sitting down. He didn't waste time with small talk that day. "I want to do something," he began. "For us. For you." I raised an eyebrow. "Okay. I've been thinking a lot about the letters," he continued, voice low but steady. "About everything you wrote. Everything you didn't say out loud. It stuck with me." I nodded, not sure where this was heading, but knowing better than to interrupt. "I kept wondering," he went on, "what would have happened if I'd read those letters sooner? If other kids caught in something similar could hear that kind of steady love, maybe it wouldn't take them as long to find their way." He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. Inside, a proposal. A small nonprofit idea he'd been working on for months. One that paired volunteer mentors, fathers, veterans, even teachers with children going through family separations. He called it the Letter Project. "I want to create a program," he said, "where adults write monthly letters to kids they're separated from. Something consistent, thoughtful, kind, like you did. Only this time, the letters don't get lost. They're kept safe until the time is right." I was quiet for a long time, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was afraid if I said it too fast, I'd lose the fullness of what I was feeling. Finally, I managed, "You understand now." He nodded. "Edo." That night, back at home, I sat on the porch and watched the light shift through the trees. Lucas wasn't just healing. He was building, not in defiance of what had been taken, but in honor of what had endured. Over the next few months, I helped him refine the idea. We met with lawyers, a few counselors, a retired school administrator who offered free space in the old community hall downtown. Word spread quietly, as it always does when something real begins. By fall, the program had its first 10 volunteers. By winter, 30. Fathers who'd lost connection to their kids. Grandparents raising grandchildren. One retired truck driver who'd never had children of his own, but said, "I got stories and patience." That ought to count. Lucas handled everything with a clarity that humbled me. He didn't try to make the nonprofit flashy. There were no splashy fundraisers, no press releases, just a shelf of stationery, a locked cabinet for privacy, and a wooden box near the front desk labeled Hope Mail. Each letter sealed with care, each story held without judgment. He trained the volunteers not in eloquence but in honesty. "Write like you're not expecting anything back," he told them. "Write like you're planting something you'll never see bloom. That's what love like this looks like." I stood in the back of the room that day, arms folded, a lump in my throat the size of Montana. It's a rare thing to see your child carry forward the best parts of you, and rarer still to know they've done it not in spite of the pain but through it. Lucas never made the project about me, but in quiet ways I saw the fingerprints. The navy blue trim on the paper. The worn bench he placed outside the hall, just like the one we'd built together years ago. And once, during a volunteer meeting, I caught sight of one of my old letters framed unobtrusively in a back hallway. Just a short one. 3 lines. No names. "I love you. I always will. You don't have to write back. Just know this letter exists." That was enough. Lucas understood, now not just as a son, but as a man. He understood the cost of silence, the power of consistency, the quiet legacy built one envelope at a time. And most of all, he understood that love doesn't need to shout to last. It just needs to be there when it matters. Some victories arrive quietly. No applause, no headlines, no big moments of vindication. Just a slow breath, a steady heart, and the quiet knowledge that something deep inside you has healed and stayed whole. That's what the end of this story felt like. Not a finish line, just a wide, quiet clearing I finally stepped into. Lucas' nonprofit, the Letter Project, continued to grow not rapidly, but steadily, the way things do when they're built to last. Volunteers came and went. Some wrote for 6 months, others for years. A few children even reconnected with parents they thought had vanished. Not all stories ended neatly. but enough found peace to keep the work going. Lucas never tried to make it about reunion. He said the point was to give people something true to hold on to, even if the relationship never returned. A bridge isn't just about crossing, he told me once. Sometimes it's about proving someone cared enough to build one. He'd say things like that now. Things I used to think quietly, now spoken aloud by the man I once carried on my shoulders. And I had stopped writing letters. Not because I had nothing left to say, but because the person I was writing to had come home. Lucas didn't live far. He'd come by often, bring groceries, ask for help fixing things around his place. Sometimes he brought Callie, his girlfriend, who had a calm, clear way of seeing things. Other times he came alone, just to sit by the fire and read. One evening, he surprised me with a small wooden box about the size of shoebox, but deeper. The grain was smooth, and a brass plate on the lid read, "For when the words still matter." Inside were copies of letters not mine, but his. Started writing them last year, he said. To kids who didn't get a box. Or to dads who didn't get the chance to write one. I nodded, fingers brushing the folded pages. You're paying it forward. He shrugged. I'm just doing what you did. Making sure silence doesn't win. That line stayed with me. Because that's what the last 5 years had been. A long, determined effort to outlast the silence. Not fight it, not rage against it, but outlive it, outlove it. And somehow I had. One afternoon in late summer, I stood at the edge of my yard, watching Lucas teach a group of teens how to plant tomatoes. They were volunteers from the center, helping set up a small community garden behind the letter-writing office. He crouched by the soil, sleeves rolled, sun at his back. Patient, present, the same way I used to teach him to tie fishing knots. Or split kindling without wasting wood. And in that moment, I didn't feel pain, or pride, or even closure. I felt peace. Peace that had taken its time. Peace that had survived a courtroom loss, years of silence, the ache of being misunderstood. This wasn't triumph like people think of it. It wasn't about winning custody, or proving someone wrong, or rewriting a narrative. It was triumph in the smallest, deepest sense. The kind that grows where nothing used to grow. The kind you earn by waiting well, by speaking gently, by never letting bitterness have the final say. Lucas turned, caught me watching, smiled. I nodded. And in that exchange, no words were needed. We both knew. Sometimes the most powerful moments are the ones no one sees. No music swells. No lights dim. Just a father and a son, quietly sharing a life that once seemed lost. Years ago, I thought the greatest tragedy was losing my child to someone else's lies. Now I realize the greater miracle was earning him back without ever demanding it. Through letters, through presence, through peace. We build what we can with what we have. And if we're lucky, if we're faithful, we leave behind more than scars. We leave bridges. We leave words that matter. We leave lives that prove it's never too late to love well. Even in silence. Especially then.